Hey everyone, you're listening to the Active Turnkey Podcast, a podcast designed for hands-off, passive real estate rental investors. In the Active Turnkey Podcast, you'll hear Tom Olson and Jared Stoutmeister discuss all things turnkey rentals with other turnkey providers, service providers, and rental investors. Our goal is to help you reach your financial freedom and whatever comes after that. Let's go. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Active Turnkey Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Stoutmeister. I'm with the Tom Olson, and we are back for another podcast.
Jared gets to host this podcast, and it's awesome. Thank you for letting me be on, Jared.
Yes, we did go through. We had a lot of people trying, angling, tryouts.
I raised my hand and I said, I can try to help you out with this one.
It came down to a few people, and then Tom came through
at the very last second, just as a nose hair.
It was at the buzzer.
Just a little bit. I had nose hair. The opportunity. Wow, that light in here is flashing, Jared.
Yeah, we'll edit that out.
It's a sign from God or not, but
it is. But
it's been raining here in Northwest Indiana.
I hope it has nothing to do with the light.
It has nothing to do with the podcast or anything that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah,
but
it is. It's Northwest Indiana. So
yes.
Tomorrow or
we're
Saturday,
in March.
It's 65.
This is exactly why I'm buying a house in Florida this year. We are in March, and March is one of these months where we get a lot of rain, and it's cold rain.
It is.
So, but we have great flowers that are going to come, right? You used to say April flowers bring May. April showers bring May flowers. In Northwest Indiana, it's March and April.
Right. Or March
showers.
Snow brings...
Sometimes it's snow.
Something like that, yeah.
It's going to be 60 on Sunday, so we're going to be happy.
Right, and that hence Northwest Indiana
65,
weather.
yes.
That's what they say about that. So if you're looking to come
and
vacation,
I'm sure that that's very valuable information for the people listening to the podcast. But hey, what we've realized is that entertainment is just as valuable.
It's what we do,
right?
Along with building rental portfolios for investors.
I mean, we've actually been told that we should just start doing comedy instead of doing rentals. We might.
That's been some feedback.
Yes, we've had some feedback.
After this podcast, some people may say stick to
your day job, stick to investments.
Yes.
No more.
So
more
you
comedy.
let us know. You tell us.
Yes, we want to hear from you. We're surveying the millions of listeners that are listening to this podcast today.
Please.
Should we go into comedy or not? If you haven't watched the Office episode that we did,
sure.
I would highly recommend it. If you guys want to know that, ask me or Jared. We can send you the link.
Sure, we'll send it to you, and you'll get a
very
18 minutes of joy.
Very. It was.
It was fun.
Good. It was good. I'm telling you.
So
we're gonna talk about houses today. I think.
Bit was brought to you by
turnkey rentals.
Turnkey rentals. So
we don't have any sponsors, Jared. We need some sponsors.
We probably should, and we probably will.
We could say all this like humor that we add to the beginning was brought to you by. And if you're a company and you want to sponsor the show, you can be like, hey.
If you see potential in us, we can.
Yes.
We're there for you.
Yeah.
We'll connect you with our agent.
We're just trying to serve you. Yes.
Yeah.
Contact my agent.
So this is episode, I believe, 36 or 37, something like that. And so today we want to talk about an interesting idea. It's just property value adds. So anytime you're investing, you want to try to figure out ways to maximize the profitability of your turnkey rental. Now, if you're a turnkey company like us, we're trying to do that from the very beginning. And we are maximizing some of those things. But there are even times now where we may sell a house today that may not have everything in there, but the potential for it. So today we're going to talk about a few of those things. Some of those things we put in our scope of work, other things that they're built-in options that could be done down the road, but we'll talk a little bit about that. So again, it's property value adds, things we can do to a specific property to add value.
And this is exciting for me because if you guys know me, I grew up in construction. So like the actual part of doing the value add is like right up my alley. I love talking about this topic. I didn't even have to study for this topic. So this is going to be all off the cuff. It's going to be raw material today. Uncut. Yes. You're getting the real story here today. But no, I think it's kind of, it's one of those things where when you're talking about value add, I think the first thing you start with, Jared, is like, what's the purpose of the value add, right? So like, there's some things that you can add, I think, for value for a renter. And then there's other things you might want to add value for if you're actually looking at appraised value or if like, what would this sell on the open market, in a retail type environment. So we
can be both sometimes.
Right. And absolutely. Like when it comes to that, there are some things absolutely that, that we'll talk about today that I think, it doesn't matter if it's for a renter or if it's for the retail market. it's going to add value both from like rent per month. A lot of rent per month is based on the area to a certain degree, but then also it really gets into, bed bath count, how big is the house. And after that, it's kind of like it goes to the finishes. So those are the three main things that you're talking about when you're talking about value from a renter's perspective. But there's almost also some wisdom as well to rents kind of get to this point where there's kind of almost like an invisible ceiling.
Sure.
And in some areas, you don't need to do some of these things to maximize the renter pool, but you do need to do these things if you want to maximize the retail value of the property.
Absolutely. And again, as an investor, you may like the easy in, easy out, cookie cutter type property where, you kind of get the idea of what the costs are going to be long term. But other investors like the idea of having potential options down the road where they, maybe this house, for instance, will jump right in. So let's just do it. For properties, what are some significant things you can do to the property to bring some of these property value adds?
Yeah, I mean, I think, most of the time, and this is not 100% exclusive, and I don't want this to come across as sexist because it's not at all. But like, if you just go with just what is reality. Reality is that women buy houses. And at the end of the day, men might pay for them, but women are the ones that actually make a higher percentage of the decisions when it comes to that. So, again, it's not 100%, but maybe probably 70, 80% of the decision making comes from a woman. So I think you have to look at that from, well, what is going to add value to a woman's life? And I think one of those things that we try to do is I think the very first thing that you think about is like the kitchen. Like, what can I do to the kitchen of a property? And it's interesting to me because, for years and years and years, there was this school of thought that if it's a rental, it doesn't really have to be pretty. You can pretty much just make sure it's livable, it's safe. You can put the cheapest material that you can possibly buy into these properties, and you're just gonna, people are just gonna automatically have to rent them, and everything's gonna be fine. But to me, and at least maybe, and again, maybe some of this is market driven, but I know at least in my market, in every property that I've ever rented, if the finishes are better, if the kitchen has a nicer finish, if it has granite, if it's got quartz, if it's got, hard finish flooring and it has nice finishes at the end of the day, and it has a good layout, it can't just be whatever has been there since the 1930s. If it has a nice layout, people will pay more for it. It'll rent faster and it will sell faster. You'll sell it higher on the retail market. So I think kitchens is one of those things that you cannot go wrong normally. Now, again, you could put too much money into a kitchen. If it's for your own house, I have no problem with it. I think even in our own personal kitchen, we probably spent more money than I would have if it was only for investment. But I think kitchens are a pretty big deal. I think something else that, when it comes to adding value, right off the bat, as soon as you roll up to a house, right? It's like, what is that first impression? What does that house look like from the street? What's that curb appeal look like? How does the house sit on the lot? What are the colors of the house? All those things, you think a lot of it's aesthetic, but at the end of the day, and it doesn't really give you real value, but it really does. It really is. It's all about that exactly right. You nailed it. Perceived value. So, those are some of the first couple things that come to my mind. Obviously, there's more things that you can do to add value to a home.
Yeah, I actually, when I was going through the list, I said the same thing right off the bat. And it's probably something that we, as a company, we have evolved with our finishes over the last few years. And it was closer to I don't think we've ever been rent ready as in the bare minimum, but we didn't go, further with our materials and such. And that was exterior and interior. So they weren't filthy. Of course they were clean, but they were not, I would say, showstoppers. They weren't people weren't, getting out of the car saying I'm living here without even seeing the inside. So yeah, the curb appeal is huge. And it wasn't something that we, from a rental perspective, we were as concerned about. But
5, 6, 7, 8 years ago,
right.
And it's even funny because some of those people that bought houses from us 7 years ago are now like, wow, I bought this house. I'm only into this property like 60, 70, 80 grand, and I can sell this thing now for $180,000. What in the world? But back then, like we were still putting in Formica countertops. We were still like doing a lot of carpet in houses. So now almost in order to get it retail ready, they have to do a little bit of work in order to get it to that, that I think it's still always a better option because I think your house is going to sell faster and and I think it's a great option if you have owned a property for a long time and you've seen this massive amount of appreciation and you want to put that money somewhere else. I think it is one of those times where it might make sense. I don't think everybody should do that.
Sure.
But I think also looking at the value of a property, I think you have to not just look at dollars and cents of how much I can get for rent and how much I can get for the retail property, but also long-term maintenance. So like if you're going to own a rental property, what can you do up front? Because you're going to have to do something normally anyways. So if you're going to refinish flooring or refinish, parts of your property, what can you do to make it have less maintenance over years? And I think one of those, honestly, I think two of those things that we have determined that we think we really want to do and we want to stick to is the hard surface countertops and hard surface flooring. So, luxury vinyl plank, the really thick stuff with good commercial warranties. It does cost a little bit more money. It costs probably double what carpet would cost, but you're not replacing it over and over and over again. And even if something does happen, which honestly, like, it's almost indestructible to a certain degree. I mean, we've only been using it for about 4 years, so I don't think we've replaced any of it. And I think these things are going to last. And I even have it in my own personal house. So I think also looking at it from that perspective, how can I make this maintenance, not necessarily maintenance free? I think maintenance free is a myth. But how can I keep my maintenance costs down the road, and it's going to cost me less money as the rents continue to grow and as I make more money in my rental property, or if I'm going to sell the property, same thing, And actually, it's kind of interesting because on the retail market, there's not a whole lot of difference between vinyl plank and carpet, and it's kind of interesting because you can get away with actually putting carpet maybe into a fix and flip, and a lot of guys do, and I try not to. I try to stay away from it. I mean, unless it's just bedrooms or something that's completely out of the way. So anyways, I think that those are some other things that you can think about, and not just thinking about it from a perspective of value of how much rent I can get, or how much the property is actually worth retail, but also like what is the long-term maintenance cost as far as value to me as the owner.
Yeah, I think you hit at the very beginning about decision making and who's making the decision. And so in many cases, we're not saying it's wrong for you not to put in all these finishes. It's just different. But you also have to know what you're going to get when you don't put those in, and you have to be okay with that. You can't be upset, or it's not logical to be upset that you're not getting the highest quality tenant if you're not giving them the highest quality of property to live in.
Right, and I think one of those things is layout. You got to be careful because and honestly, I've made this mistake years back where we were to buy a property only based on square footage and area, and we didn't really take into account as much like the functionality, even the look of the house, and even like some of the other X factors about that property specifically, like what is the curb appeal? How does this feel when you actually walk up to it? What is the layout, and how convenient is it for people? Is it normal, or is it something that's kind of a little bit weird? So those are things, if you can take some of those weirdness out of a property, if you can do things that will add curb appeal or add more functionality to a property, you have to understand that's going to be better for a tenant. They're going to have better functionality, or to somebody who's going to own the property, they're going to have better functionality as well.
The lack of functionality will hit your bottom line for rent.
It's going to, absolutely, because it's just not going to rent as fast. It's not going to rent as high. 100%. And same thing with retail. Like people just aren't going to pay. You might get a cookie cutter. They used to call them vinyl boxes, right? So a vinyl box, which means it's pretty much, there's a whole subdivision of the exact same type of looking house. But people will buy that because it's most of the time they're built with a modern type of flow in the house, where sometimes some of the older houses have been cut up, or they've been added onto, or you might have 3 additions on a house. And sometimes those things they add square footage, which I think is another thing that we're going to talk about at some point that you can do to add value to a property, especially from an appraisal perspective. Appraisers appraise a property based on square footage. Square footage is the number one thing that they will use when it comes to determining the value of a property. It's the number one thing. Now, what they give you per price per square foot has a lot to do with finishes, functionality. How normal is this compared to the rest of the properties in the area, and all that.
I think it's a great point because, again, back in the day, we would look at a house, say, this house is located in Hammond, Maryville, Hobart, great areas to own an investment property. Gary, now you would say, oh, it's got over 1,000 square feet, 3 bed, 1 bath, or 2 bath. Oh, this is going to rent for X automatically, when it's not necessarily the case. Or for us, we generally have very minimal single-digit days on market for rent right now. It's just we don't have difficulty finding rent tenants.
Yeah, we actually, before we came in here, we just talked to our property manager who said, I have 4 people that are looking for houses and I don't have a house for them.
What do you have? Yeah.
So, and they're trying to get, even pre-look at houses that aren't even completely ready for people. Right. Normally we try to make sure that we wait until they're completely ready, but now people are, banging on our doors for rentals. And even it's the same way for retail. Yeah. Like as of right now.
So, but along that same line, you do need to look for these obsolescences, we would call them, things that would, things that are going to interrupt that. If you have to walk through one bedroom to get to another, that's absolutely going to affect that experience. Because again, if you don't really like it too much, you have to remember, and we tell our team very often, if you have to put yourself in a position of somebody who's going to rent this house or live in this house. If you don't really like it, then they probably won't either. So it's very simple, but you have to think about that. And when you're an investor, sometimes you see a great deal on the market. Oh, I'm going to buy this, but that's one reason. It's all
on numbers, and you got to be careful because numbers don't always tell the whole story.
It's not static. So we talked about curb appeal. One thing that's really interesting I wrote down is just cleanliness.
Big time.
It's so interesting to me. And when you see stuff hit on the market, again, our stuff pops. And we do HD pictures, but we like HD pictures because it actually shows our nice houses. But you see some pictures, and the pictures are dark, and the houses they're not inviting. And in many cases, we've walked through houses where they're really not clean. These are houses listed on the market for rent or even retail. And they want, again, that's the interesting thing, they want as much as the house that we're listing. And so
you'd be shocked at how much a power wash will do to an outside of a house, how much an extra sweeping will do, an extra mopping, an extra wiping down of the countertops and of your floors. And if a house has been listed and it's been listed out there for even a couple of weeks, you probably should even get out there and try to get somebody to, even if it costs you $100 to hire a cleaning company to wipe everything down or whatever the case is. You're absolutely right. Whether it's a rental or whether it's a retail house like that, it's just that it's those little tiny things that people think, and it's not always true. This is the problem. Like, it's not always true that just because it's not clean that there's other problems.
Sure.
But that's the perception that somebody has. As soon as you walk up to that property and as soon as you start seeing, oh man, this isn't really that clean. And I guess it's the same, we have to think of the same experience that we have. When we go into a restaurant or when we go into, a mall, or we go somewhere and you're just like, you just are like, man, this is dirty. Like, I don't want to shop here. I don't want to eat here. And it's the same way it is for, for housing.
Sure.
And I think even when appraisers go into properties,
absolutely,
the more clean, when an appraiser comes into a property, one of the best things you can do is roll out the red carpet for him, like sweep everything you possibly can that morning of, make it smell nice. And like, trust me, you'll get $5,000 to $10,000 more, even if you didn't do anything. Like, there's no significant value that you've added that morning, but if you will spend a half an hour to an hour cleaning before that appraiser shows up, you will get a higher appraiser.
We do not want him in that house until it is completely done, professionally cleaned, all that. The investor, we do not want that appraiser in. We even sometimes, even for tighter windows, we really prefer not to, because the appraisal matters so much. But those were a couple things: curb appeal, cleanliness. Those are things. But so Tom, you mentioned a couple things right away. But what are the significant things you can do? They may even cost quite a bit of money, but some things you can do to add significant value to a home.
Well, I talked about kitchen because I think kitchen is important. I think about the curb appeal is important. But I think if you're really looking at what appraisers are looking at for what they're going to appraise a property for, and even renters, like I think the number two things is probably bed and bath. So how many bedrooms does it have and how many bathrooms does it have? There's a huge difference in our market. Now, this isn't the case. This is different in different parts of the country. I will tell you, like right now, I'm doing a lot of research in Pensacola, and I'll give everybody who's listening to this a little bit of a sneak peek. We may be starting a second market at some point. It might be a year from now, but Pensacola, Florida, is a place that I'm eyeing myself. And if you look at the 2 bedrooms versus 3 bedrooms for rent, there's not much difference.
Interesting.
And I think it's just because it's more of a retirement community.
Sure.
It's more of a different type of, of a type of community. And like, so a 2 bedroom might be $1,300-$1,400 for rent, when the exact same basically layout, everything that's a 3 bedroom might only be like $1,400, $1,600 a month. It's not as big of a difference. In our market, it's a lot larger of a difference. It's a lot bigger difference. I say it's probably $300 to $400. In most cases, difference between that 2 bedroom and 3 bedroom.
Absolutely.
And now I don't think there's that big of a difference between a 3 bedroom and a 4 bedroom.
I agree.
But there is a little bit of a bump still. And then I actually think what's more important than a 4th bedroom is a second bath. I really think that 3 full 2 baths. So if you can get 3 bedrooms and 3 2 baths, 2 full baths, not 3 2 baths. I'm not sure I'm not sure what I'm talking about there. So if I can get 3 bedrooms and 2 full baths, then I think you do get probably a more significant jump in rent than you would as like a 4-1, say. Now a 4-2 is probably going to rent for a little bit more than a 3-2, but not that much. It is going to be more, maybe $100. In most cases, unless it's Gary. Honestly, a 4-2 in Gary, you might get $200 to $300 more per month in rent in Gary than you do for a 3-2. So I mean, that's really like bed bath count is probably the most important thing, even more important than square footage.
Yeah. In our market, the difference between 2 and 3 bed is significantly larger than any other difference between the 1 and 2 bath, between the 3 and 4 bed, any of that.
So in some cases, like you might take a 2 bedroom. And it's interesting because back in the 80s and 70s and 80s, it seemed like there was like this popular thing that a typical ranch 3 bedroom, people would take out a wall of that 3rd bedroom and make it into one large bedroom, and then for who knows why they would do it, but whatever. Like maybe it was just maybe they got older and they decided to that they were going to stay there forever, and that's fine. But if you can add that wall back in and add the closet back in, well, now it's 3 bedrooms. Yeah. Sometimes you have to do a little bit more and be a little bit more creative. Add a bedroom in the basement maybe, and most of the time when we're adding bedrooms and basements, unless it's a 3 and we're adding a 4th bedroom. If it's a 2 and we're adding a 3rd bedroom, you got to put in egress windows, and you got to make sure you do all that stuff. If you're adding just that 4th or 5th kind of vanity bedroom, you can kind of call it a closet. I mean, not a closet, an office and all that. And if they want to use it, it's up to them to use it. But like for us, I'm looking at bedrooms is probably the most important thing that you can do to raise value, whether it's retail or not. And then I think really probably after bedrooms and bathrooms is square footage. Yeah. So we do live in a market where there's a lot of basements, and that is a place for significant value add. Sure. Now you're not going to get the same amount of value in the basement as you would for the upstairs of a property. But say if it's 1,000 square foot house and it has 1,000 square foot basement, you're probably going to get $60 to $70 a square foot for that basement in added value. And it can be very cheap to completely finish an entire basement, 1,000 square feet, maybe add a bathroom, which is going to cost some money, and maybe add egress windows if you need to. But you might only be into this thing like $30,000 in the whole basement with adding those extra features. You might get $60,000, $70,000 in extra value. So, and obviously you're going to get a whole lot more in rent. I mean, there is schools of thought of, do you really want basements for rentals or not? Like for me, I'll just be honest with you, I kind of prefer not. Like I would almost, for my own personal, I have some rentals that have basements, so I'm not completely against it. They make sense at times. But like, if you ask me, the rentals that I'd prefer to just keep forever are like slab houses with no basements, and they're all vinyl plank, everything. There's not a whole lot of maintenance because there's not a lot that can go wrong. Yeah. And even if for some reason you get that, 1 in every 200 or 300 tenant that wants to trash the place or takes your copper or whatever, there's not a lot of stuff in those small little slab houses for them to even, ruin. So, and again, I mean, I'm not trying to say that as like that happens all the time, and I think a lot of people, want to act like that happens all the time in bad areas. It really doesn't, as long as it's been managed well. Knock on wood, and let's keep keep it on the down low, Jared. But I mean,
I mean, not marketing for that. No.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's never going to happen, but like, you know, we've had some issues where people have, you know, broken doors, or they've got dogs or whatever that have dug holes, or you know, stuff like that. So there's been significant damage in some of the properties that we've had, but you know, they haven't taken copper and haven't taken, you know, they've taken appliances, but they haven't taken, you know, things like that. So anyways, all that to say, I think some of the most important things you can do is bedrooms and bathrooms. I think kitchen we already addressed, curb appeal, and then square footage, because at the end of the day, what that appraiser is going to look at for sure is going to be price per square foot. I mean, if you look at all the appraisals out there that are on the residential side, now this is not necessarily true for commercial. Sure. But for residential, they're appraising your property based on square footage. So like if you have an 825 square foot house and everything else in the area is a 1,200 square foot house, just know, even if it's a 3-2, and even if everything else is the same as those other houses, you're not going to get the same total value. You might get the same price per square foot, but think about it. Even if there's $120 a square foot for that 1,200 square foot house, that might appraise for $140. But your 800 square foot house at $120 is only going to be like around 100. So, you know, price per square foot is probably the number one key factor when it comes to value and what you can do to add value to a property.
So I did want to touch back on something. So Tom mentioned his favorite type of property is the 3-1, whatever, 3-2 on
3-1, 3-2, yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with that. I don't mind a basement, but I like it not to finish as an investment. So because that's where you have to keep on pouring money back into the property, is replacing this drywall, flooring, whatever.
If there's something that happens on the road,
So I like it if it's legal, so that it gives me potential down the road to finish. But I agree.
Well, and that's true. So like I'm looking at this only from the renter's perspective. Like if I'm only going to rent a house and I'm going to buy a house and I'm going to hold it for the rest of my life, and I want it super low maintenance, and that's really like some of our investments should be those. Like, I agree. I really do. Like I think there is a bad misconception, and we're getting off topic because we're talking about value adds, but like there is a bad misconception out there about, you know, let's buy a house and let's just sell it every couple of years. And I'm like, you lose so much every time you sell a property. It's almost like energy. You know, every time you focus on something and then you turn your focus and focus on something else, it's even like a law within energy itself. You know, where like every time that there's a transfer of energy, you lose energy. So you're going to lose money every time there's this type of transfer. So like but I think some of our rentals, I really do believe, should be like lifetime rentals. Like I'm going to hold on to this thing forever. It's just going to cash flow. That's the whole purpose of me getting into, and that's really how most people get into rentals. They think all of their houses are that way. I don't really believe in that either. I do believe that there's times, like it does make sense. The market dictates this, and you can't force it, but the market will dictate where there are times in our market changes, and you do need to be. And sometimes you need to sell because you're worried about it crashing down the road. Sometimes you need to sell because you're maybe it's time to retire, and you're like you want a different type of a lifestyle, and you don't want to have to worry about that. And sometimes other opportunities come that are maybe better, or maybe it's just something that you would rather invest in. So, but as far as adding value, I think those are the main things. Do you have anything else to add to that, Jared?
No, those are significant values. We did want to really quickly touch on some things you can do in the home. And Tom's already briefly touched on them. These are just a few things that we do. We would recommend you pay attention to, and we put these in our scope of work when we're trying to, again, add value. Because in the end, you want to try to do the things that are going to give, I call it HGTV for tenants. You know, they like living in as much of a house as you would want to live in retail. If you're going to buy your home and live in it, they like the same thing. And that's the kind of tenant you want in your home. Someone who really likes your house. They want to live in your home. We've talked about that in several podcasts. So a few of those things we talked about. Hard surfaces, you already mentioned that. You got hard surfaces on the floor. If it doesn't have hardwood, we refinish. We put in the luxury vinyl plank. I'll tell you right now, the luxury vinyl plank we're using now is it's fantastic. The seams are incredibly tight. You're not having any issues, and we do see some of the poor vinyl that people have put in over the years that are popping and warping, and fortunately, if you use a higher end grade stuff that we're using, you're not really dealing with that issue. But he also mentioned quartz countertops. Now, one thing we started doing over the last year or so is right now any house we do a backsplash. Like a subway tile backsplash or some sort of mosaic type backsplash. It's fairly insignificant cost, I mean, it's a little bit, but it's such a smaller cost, but it gives you that wow factor, and along with the quartz countertops, that really pops.
Yeah, and we know. I mean, again, like when you're talking rentals, a lot of people just don't want to spend that little extra money.
Yeah.
And even in the bathrooms, when you're talking, backsplashes in their tubs, it's so standard for us to put that in our own property. But when we start thinking about rentals, like I don't know how many rentals I see with just like really it's trailer park materials put in there.
Sure.
And I'll be honest with you, when we first started, like I kind of just let other contractors dictate what we put in our properties, and I just got to the point where it's like, no, like I walked into houses, I'm like, like this is not gonna work for me. And like you said, you have to do something anyways.
Right.
So instead of spending $300 just on the on a bathroom backsplash. Or tub surround, whatever you want to call it. Like instead of spending $300, spend $800 or $1,100. Like just like at the end of the day, it's going to last longer. It's not going to get ripped down, and the next tenant that comes in has you're not going to have to replace it. And like you said, it adds that value factor of HDTV, for rentals or for retail, either way. But.
Yeah, and it's that perception we talked about. Now all of a sudden that's like the focal point of the bathroom. You have this beautiful subway tile surround. It's gorgeous, and so that's pretty much standard now with Olsen Group projects. We just put in the subway tile or some sort of tile surround in there, and again, that's great for long term. The other stuff tends to fall apart and gets nasty, but these tend to last, but it provides that extra value add. So when you pair that up with the backsplash and the kitchens, it's just it gives that perception of high end that you want, and that helps you elevate the value and the rent. You have appliances. It's something we've done for several years now. We've added appliances. You're not really getting that value back in the appraisal. You're really not getting that accounted for, but we really haven't had an issue with it. And that does matter to a tenant and to a homeowner for that matter. They want to see what the house looks like. And so we
you
used
have to think about it from a tenant's perspective. How much money do they have to spend in order to get into that property? So, like, if they've got to spend an extra $2,000 to buy appliances, or maybe they have to go find used ones or whatever. Not only that, then they're the ones like bringing them in and taking them out, and who knows what damage that might do to a property. So I to me, like my preference has always been if we can get them, and I don't think that we put them in 100% of our properties. I do think there's still some couple, in some areas where like we leave out those. But I really do think that if you can provide the kitchen appliances, we don't provide the washer and dryer. But if you can provide kitchen appliances, I think it is a value add. Especially to the tenants, and I think even like in retail. Like there's no houses in our market that don't have kitchen appliances. So like you might have a market, you might say, well, my market's not that way, and maybe that's fine. But I'll just tell you, in our market, you're not going to sell a house retail without kitchen appliances.
We do stainless retail, pretty standard, but in rentals we do the black or white, normally black appliance. That usually tends to last longer with scratches and whatnot. But it really helps when you're placing a tenant. You mentioned laundry. So one thing we do is we want to make sure we have laundry hookups. Some people may be that big of a deal. Oh, they can go to laundromat. I'm telling you, when you can provide laundry options for your tenant, you're providing value.
About adding value, and this is something that there are some things that we do later on, and maybe we can get to those things that the property management company will do.
Absolutely.
But there are some other things you can do. Like we will offer that to our tenants from the property management company. Like we will rent you. Laundry, a washer and dryer. So again, instead of them having to spend $1,200 to go buy a washer and dryer, well, maybe if they can rent them from us for $150 a month, we actually make that money, and then we get to keep the appliances when it's all said and done. So at the end of the day, like, trying to find those are little things that you can do to add value. Today, we're really talking about the property and what you can add, with the actual property itself.
But again, just being able to do laundry in their own home, that's a value add, something you do. A couple other things we do, we add security doors in areas that we would feel need it. It does help the tenant feel safe. That's a value add for them. They feel like they not only have a beautiful home, but they also feel protected. So that's something we've been doing. One thing we've started doing in the last year or so is using smart locks in our property. We're really getting into nitty gritty stuff here, but if any of if you have a property and when there's a turnover, what do you do? First thing you do, change locks. And generally speaking, you're talking what, $75, $100 per lock.
It's not just the lock; it's the labor to go do it.
Yep, so everything. So we started using smart locks. So that's more or less something Olson Group kind of takes on that cost up front, but it's definitely going to help you. There is a cost for the labor, the time for the guys to change them, but it's a quick thing, and you're not worrying about replacing locks every time. And so it's
a smart lock. You can basically like make that. If you don't know, a lot of people guys probably already know, but you can change that lock in the future to any key you want. So really, if you really wanted to, if you had a huge complex, you could have them all on one key. It's probably not a good thing, but you could change the locks down the road to whatever key you want that to be.
So that's a value that we provide to our customers.
You're really just changing keys in the future. You're not changing the whole locks.
Correct.
And it's a better, sturdier lock as well, so
correct.
It kind of feels better. It's a little safer. It feels a little safer. I'm assuming it's harder to pick. So they're just better locks all around as well.
And so a couple other things you can do. One thing, I don't know how much value, Tom, you can probably help us on this, but some of our houses come with AC units. Some of them don't. Now, one thing I'll tell you is I don't see the needle moving on rent for an AC unit. We just don't really see that moving too much. But one thing you can do is if you don't have an AC unit, you could provide a window unit for your tenant. I've done it for my personal renters, and they appreciated it. So you are providing them an option, but an AC unit can be pretty expensive.
You're getting it now. You're getting into like different areas and different classes, because I do think if you're in a B class or
correct.
Up,
yep.
You probably have to have an AC unit, and there's really no harm in doing so. The only reason why we wouldn't, honestly, it's still my preference to put AC units in every house. I don't care where it's at.
Sure.
Now, if you do get into some neighborhoods where you kind of, and even like it's interesting because like we've had them stolen in areas where we're like, I can't believe this got stolen in this area. So like you can put cages on them, which does cost another, I don't know, $500-$600. So you can put cages on them in those areas where you think that that they might get swiped, and I don't know why people like want to swipe them. I'm sure that they probably only get a couple $100 for them, but they're easy targets for people to come in and cut and just pull out of there. So like it is my preference. I still think even in Gary, and I still think over half of ours in Gary still end up with actual central air units. And I do want to be mindful. There are some areas of the country where it's legislated. You actually have to provide air conditioning. We are not in one of those areas. And does it get up to 100 degrees in the summer? Absolutely, but like it's rare, and it maybe happens a couple times a year. Right. It's not like it's a norm. Our summers are normally in the 80s, and most people can be fine with a fan. Really, like if you think about it, like we've never had air conditioning in our own personal house growing up. So like so I don't want this to sound like we don't want to provide it. I really do actually prefer to provide it as an owner. As a management company, I prefer to own to give it to them. But like I do know that there are some instances where you kind of are afraid maybe I shouldn't put it in there. And there is, like Jared said, as far as from a cost perspective versus how much you get for rent, there probably isn't that much of a difference in those areas. Right. In the A-class area, I probably think you're probably not going to rent it maybe with that. So
they're choosing another
and again,
house.
like if we're in Pensacola, it's a whole different area. Like it may not have a heat pump, but it's going to have.
Tom can't stop talking about Pensacola, folks.
It's definitely going to have AC if you're in the South, or even if you're south of the Mason-Dixon line, you're probably going to have AC in your units.
We only had a couple more. So one things that we don't do is we don't. So we're talking about value adds, but in this case, we don't put in ceiling fans. Why? Because they break down, and usually the owner is going to incur that cost. And the same thing for even screen doors. We stopped doing those. Now, sometimes we have tenants who ask to put them on, and we actually allow them to do it at their own cost. But those screen doors tend to break down, and it's just same thing as a ceiling fan. And so we want to try to limit those things to try to help the investor long term.
Yeah, when it comes to rentals, 100%, we never would want to put a ceiling fan in. Now, retail, occasionally, yes. Like retail, I think a fan here or there, or a little fancier light here or there, I think is definitely going to make the difference. But even retail, we normally take off screen doors or storm doors because we normally have freshly painted an outside door, and we want that to be kind of a focal point or whatever. Maybe on the back door or screened in porch, might be a little bit different. But for the most part, we are taking those off, and we do find that for the most part they do tend to and it might be, it's one of those issues where the property management company seems like they're the ones that we do have them on, like we're always going out to fix them. I don't know what the deal is. So just know that if you're going to manage your own properties, if you might think this nice storm door looks amazing, but the 6th or 7th time you've been out there to adjust it or fix it. And it's funny because even my own property, my own house, like I have one in my own house, but I'm always adjusting it. I'm always buying a new arm for it. Like, and so it is kind of a hassle.
Well, we've pretty much run the whole gamut. We've talked about adding square footage and not putting in ceiling fans in your home. So we've talked about all these different things. But again, this is about how you can add value into your property, and specifically turnkey rentals are with that angle. And so we really do hope this podcast brought you some value.
One more before we get going. I know you're wanting to go here. So I do have one more thing that
I'm in a hurry, but Tom's stopping me.
We don't do this very often. But I do know that another thing you can do to add value is do additions. Like you can't so we talk about adding square footage in the existing square footage that's already there. Sometimes attics have tall enough ceilings where you can add a stairwell, you can add a second floor or third floor. Sometimes basements you can add, and that's what we would normally do with our type properties. We don't get into this too much. But you can also add square footage if you have the contracting to be able to do it at a price where it makes sense and you're not like overdoing it. But I mean, I do know some other people around the country that they maybe add second floors or they may add additions on the back, depending on what value of the house that you're at. I mean, think about it, like people might own rentals that are $500,000-$600,000, and to add a $50,000-$60,000 addition off the back of the house, like might give you an extra $150,000 worth of value. So that was just the one last thing that I was thinking, as we were talking about how to add value to a property.
He couldn't wait.
I want to make sure I got that one last nugget in there for you guys.
Absolutely. So I really appreciate your time, Tom. And again, hopefully this brought you value as we've been talking about how to add value to your turnkey rental property. So one thing I did want to throw out there is we have a brand new website. Olson Group has a brand new website. I've been talking about it for a long time. It's finally done. So if you go to buyolsongroup.com, you're going to see it's all done. You're going to see pictures of people that actually work here at the company, houses we've done some projects on. Our podcast is on there as well.
Other than me and Jared.
Correct. Now we do have some.
They're not as funny as us, just so you guys know.
No, not even close. No. We would not allow them on film here. But you
no.
do get to see some high quality professional photos of me and Tom. We are on there, and we do look quite nice.
We look much nicer than we look on this podcast.
Correct. We don't do makeup for this, but we did for those photos. If you want to see them, you'll do it. But you'll get to see our team. We have our team members on there. So if some of you guys you hear a name, or some of you haven't seen any of the people that you work with or communicated with here, you'll be able to meet those people. And so if you have an opportunity to get on there, go to buyolsongroup.com, check us out. If you are wanting to, you can see our podcast there, but you can also join our buyers list from there. And then also we do have a new buyer's guide that's going to be created here and ready for us in the next month or so. We're going to be rolling out. And so we'll be providing that for all of our clients as well as new people as they're coming in. So you be on the lookout for that.
Absolutely. And also there's also a link to the property management company as well. Absolutely. If you're looking for property management in Northwest Indiana, you can also check that out.
So if you're looking to invest and start building a portfolio, we do that. We build rental portfolios for investors. So if you're interested in that, you can reach out to me at jared@buyolsongroup.com, or as I mentioned, you can go to our website and get on the list, and then we'll start communication from there. And we are sending out a list even this evening and to our buyers. But thank you for joining us. Active Turnkey,
the best way to buy rentals.
Olson Group Network makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, Olson Group Network does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Any third-party materials or content of any third-party site referenced in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policies of Olson Group Network. Olson Group Network assumes no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast, or the compliance with the applicable laws of such materials and/or links referenced herein.